What is up, everyone? My name is Joseph, and welcome back to Casually Competitive MTG, where it is our goal to bring you semi-competitive EDH gameplay content that is both fast-paced and entertaining. We are continuing our budgeted season with this episode, and for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, for our 4th season of gameplay, we decided to make sure that all of the decks played are under $200 at the time we built them, not including commanders or basic lands. We also decided to do something a little different for the last game of the season, which will be the one that comes out right after this one, and we took some direct deck submissions from our patrons and Twitch subscribers if they fit these budget restrictions, so that will be coming out next week. But for this week, the 4 commanders that we built for this pod were the partner commanders Pako, Arcane Retriever, and Haldan, Avid Arcanist, Grand Warlord Radha, the Mimeoplasm, and Ghave, Guru of Spores. Now, before we get into the opening hands and deck introductions, let's go over our channel promotions. First up, we're now sponsored by Alter Sleeves. If you're interested in getting some art for your cards, but you don't want to physically alter your cards, check out Alter Sleeves using the link in our description. There's some great artists on there, and Alter Sleeves makes a really good product, making inner sleeves for your cards with some really good looking art on it, so check them out if you're interested in that. Outside of that, if you want to help support the channel, in the description you'll also find a link to our Patreon as well as to our merch store. If you're planning on buying cards in the near future, use our TCG affiliate link to directly help out the channel at no cost to you. And finally, if you're looking for some more Magic related products, we have affiliate with Flipside Gaming, where if you use our code CasuallyMTG at checkout, not only will you get a 10% discount off eligible purchases, but you'll help out the channel as well. Now with the promotions out of the way, let's get into the opening hands and deck introductions. Going first in this game is Jordan playing the partner commanders Pako and Haldan. This deck looks to get passive card advantage from the commander's abilities by exiling opponent's cards and then using those to his advantage, while looking for a win con involving either a Kiki Jiki and Splinter Twin combo, or a way to take infinite combo steps and mill out each of his opponents with something like a Neheb the Eternal and Aggravated Assault. The biggest areas Jordan had to hold off on due to the budget restrictions were, since he is in 3 colors, the ramp and color fixing of this deck is a little subpar, and his control package is also a little bit higher CMC and less efficient than this deck normally would be if there was no budgeted restrictions. Jordan's opening hand contained an island, a forest, a mountain, a preordain, a flusterstorm, a windfall, and an aggravated assault. Going next is Adam playing Grand Warlord Radha. This is a Gruul-based value stacks deck that looks to slow down the board with cards like Rurik Thar, Collector Oof, and even a little bit of land destruction in here, breaking parity with Radha's ability to ramp without lands or artifacts, and just get a lot of value off of just being in green. This deck eventually wins through a Kiki Jiki based combo, or also, similarly to Jordan, through Aggravated Assault using Radha's ability to generate that additional mana. As I've said in other decks of similar colors, the biggest areas that this deck is weakened due to the budget restrictions are the card draw and ramp, both in red and green, can get rather expensive, so while cheap cards like Occam Adversary are very valuable and can get a lot of value, cards like Wheel of Fortune and Sylvan Library just aren't able to be put into this deck. Adam's opening hand contained a mountain, a forest, an elvish mystic, a regrowth, a legion warboss, a bloodbraid elf, and Rurik Thar the Unbowed. Going third is Nate L playing the Mimeoplasm. This deck looks to just get a lot of graveyard-based value, all while looking for a win con involving something like generating infinite mana with Necrotic Ooze and having an outlet, or through just using the Mimeoplasm in order to copy valuable and efficient creatures. There's also some backup lines in here to just keep the life totals under control by playing cards like Lord of Extinction that just really capitalize off of people's graveyards. The biggest areas that this deck suffered due to the budgetary restrictions are just the card quality, especially in a 3-color deck, is suffering quite a bit. The ramp and card draw and tutors in these 3 colors are just not what they could be, and the win cons are a little bit slower than you would normally expect from these colors. Nate's opening hand contained an island, a swamp, a botanical sanctum, a flooded grove, a psychic corrosion, a windfall, and a beast within. And finally, going last is Bill playing Ghave, Guru of Spores. Now, honestly, what doesn't Ghave do? Ghave combos with like almost every card in Magic, but specifically this deck looks to use cards like Cryptic Trilobite and an Undying effect in order to just generate infinite saprolings, and either waiting until he can attack with them or using a card like Corpse Knight to take advantage of these ETBs. Due to the budget, similar to other black and green decks, this deck does struggle a little bit with card draw and tutor quality, but one big thing I want to mention that this deck can't run due to these budget restrictions is the card Earthcraft, which is just an insanely good card with Ghave. So in lieu of this, he just added a few more extra combo pieces that can create extra +1/+1 counters and hopefully get him where he needs to be. Bill's opening hand contained 2 forests, a swamp, an Elvish Mystic, an Eladamri's Call, a Green Sun Zenith, and an Aven Mind Sensor. If you want to watch these games live, we stream Sunday afternoons over on our Twitch channel, link is in the description for that, and while you're down there, go ahead and click on the poll link to vote for your favorite commander from this match in order to let your voice be heard for our fan favorites match, which will come after the season finale. That all being said, with the opening hands and deck introductions out of the way, let's get into the gameplay. Jordan starts off this game by drawing, playing an island as his land, and then for a blue mana, casting a Preordain, scrying 2 cards to the bottom, drawing a card, and then passing the turn to Adam. Adam on his turn plays a forest, and then taps that forest to cast an Elvish Mystic, and then ships the turn to Nate. Nate plays a Botanical Sanctum as his land, and then gives the turn to Bill. Bill, for his turn, plays a forest, and then taps that forest to cast his own Elvish Mystic. With nothing left, he passes to Jordan. Jordan untaps, plays a forest as his land, and then taps for 2 mana to cast a Growth Spiral, drawing a card and then putting a mountain onto the battlefield. With nothing left, he gives the turn to Adam. Adam untaps, plays a mountain as his land, and then taps his mana to cast a Legion Warboss. He then moves to combat, and from the Legion Warboss trigger, he creates a Goblin token and then swings 1 damage at Nate L. Nate L declares no blockers, takes the damage, and then Adam gives the turn to Nate L. Nate untaps, plays a Flooded Grove as his land, and then taps his mana to cast a Vantress Gargoyle. With nothing left, he passes to Bill. Bill untaps, plays a Swamp as his land, and then for 3 mana casts a Kodama's Reach. He searches up a Plains to the battlefield tapped and a Swamp to his hand, and with nothing left, he passes to Jordan. Jordan untaps, plays a Forest as his land, and then taps his mana to cast one of his partner commanders, Haldan, Avid Arcanist. With nothing left, he gives a turn to Adam. Adam untaps, also plays his own forest as his land for turn, and then he taps his mana to play his commander, Grand Warlord Radha. He then goes to combat and creates another Goblin token from the Legion Warboss, and then swings a total of 8 damage at Bill, putting a +1/+1 counter onto one of the Goblin tokens from the Legion Warboss Mentor trigger. He generates 2 red and 2 green mana from these attacks, and in his second main phase, he uses this mana to help cast a Bloodbraid Elf. It cascades on cast, and he cascades into an Abrade. With this Abrade, since the Vantress Gargoyle is an artifact, he targets that, and the Vantress Gargoyle is destroyed. With nothing left, Adam gives the turn to Nate. Nate L untaps, plays a Swamp as his land, and then taps for 3 mana to cast a Beast Within, targeting Radha. Radha is destroyed, Adam gets a 3/3 Beast token, and Nate, with nothing left to do, passes the turn to Bill. Bill untaps, plays a forest as his land, and then taps for 2 mana to cast a Fel Warstone. He then taps his mana to cast a Green Sun Zenith, X equaling 3, and when it resolves, he searches up a Generous Patron to the battlefield. When the patron enters the battlefield, Bill supports 2, putting a counter on Adam's Elvish Mystic and Jordan's Haldan, drawing 2 cards from the patron, and with nothing left, Bill gives the turn to Jordan. Jordan untaps, plays an island as his land, and then taps his mana to cast his other partner commander, Pako, Arcane Retriever. He then goes to combat and swings Pako at Bill, and on attack, he exiles the top card of everyone's library, a Basalt Monolith from himself, a Forest from Adam, an Earwig Squad from Nate L, and a Swords to Plowshares from Bill. This gives Pako 3 +1/+1 counters, and Bill takes a total of 6 commander damage. With nothing left, Jordan gives the turn to Adam. Adam untaps, plays a forest as his land, and then taps for 3 mana to cast an Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing his Bloodbraid Elf as an additional cost. When it resolves, he searches an Orin Frostfang to the battlefield. He then goes to combat, and the Legion Warboss creates another 1/1 Goblin token, and he declares his attackers, swinging his beefed up token at Bill, a 1/1 Goblin at Jordan, and the rest at Nate. Legion Warboss triggers, and he puts another +1/+1 counter on one of the goblins attacking Nate. No blockers are declared. Bill takes 2 damage, Jordan takes 1, Nate takes 7, and Adam draws 5 cards from the Orin Frostfang. In his second main phase, Adam for 2 mana casts a Kenrith's Transformation, targeting Pako. It resolves, Pako becomes a 3/3 elk with no additional abilities, and Adam draws a card. Adam then goes to his end step, discards down to hand size, and passes the turn to Nate L. Nate untaps, plays a Woodland Cemetery as his land, and then taps for 3 mana to cast a Psychic Corrosion. With nothing left to do, he ships the turn to Bill. Bill untaps, plays a Swamp as his land, and then taps his mana to cast his commander, Ghave, Guru of Spores. He follows this up by casting Young Wolf, and with a few combo pieces on the board but nothing left to do, he ships the turn to Jordan. Jordan untaps, plays a Mountain as his land, and then goes to combat, swinging his Elked Pako at Adam for 6 damage. Adam declares no blockers, takes the damage, and in his second main phase, Jordan casts the Basalt Monolith exiled from Pako from the turn before. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Adam. Adam untaps, plays a Mountain, and then goes to combat, creating another Goblin token. He declares his attackers, swinging everything at Jordan, putting another +1/+1 counter on another 1/1 Goblin token from the Legion Warboss Mentor trigger, and Jordan, after declaring no blockers, takes 16 damage. Adam draws 8 cards off of the Orin Frostfang trigger, and in his second main phase, he taps for a mana to cast a Wild Growth, enchanting one of his mountains. He then taps his mana to cast a Tender Shoot Dryad, and he then goes to pass the turn to Nate L, and on Adam's end step, Jordan casts the Exiled Swords to Plowshares from the earlier Pako trigger to exile the Dryad, continuing the trend of never allowing me to see this card last an entire turn cycle. The sword resolves, Adam gains 2 life, and Nate L then goes to his turn, untaps, draws, and when he draws, Psychic Corrosion triggers and everybody mills 2 cards. He then plays an island as his land for turn, and then taps his mana to cast his commander, the Mimeoplasm. When it enters the battlefield, he has it enter as a copy of Bloodbraid Elf from Adam's graveyard, and he also exiles Vantress Gargoyle to put 5 additional +1/+1 counters on it, making it an 8/7. He then goes to pass the turn to Bill, and on Nate's end step, Bill sacrifices his Young Wolf to Gave's ability in order to put a +1/+1 counter on the Mimeoplasm, drawing a card off of the Generous Patron, and Undying then triggers, and the Wolf comes back with a +1/+1 counter. Bill then goes to his turn, untaps, plays a Plains as his land, and then pays a mana and removes a counter from Young Wolf in order to create a Sapperling token with Gave's ability. He then again activates Ghave, sacrificing the Young Wolf to put another +1/+1 counter on Mimeoplasm in order to draw another card, and then Young Wolf comes back due to the Undying trigger with a +1/+1 counter on it. Bill then taps his mana to cast a Cultivate, putting a forest onto the battlefield tapped and getting a swamp to his hand. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Jordan. Jordan untaps and plays Adam's Exiled Forest from the earlier Pako trigger as his land for turn. He then taps his mana to cast a Corridor Monitor, untapping the Basalt Monolith he used to help cast this spell. He floats 2 colorless mana in this exchange, and he then uses this to help cast a Windfall. In response to Windfall, Bill casts an Abzan Charm, exiling the Mimeoplasm. The Windfall then resolves, each player discards their hand and draws 7 cards. Nate's Psychic Corrosion triggers off of these draws and mills his opponents for a total of 14 cards. Jordan then goes to combat and swings his Elked Commander at Adam for 6 more damage, and he then goes to his second main phase and he casts a Birds of Paradise, and he follows this up by casting an Arbor Elf. Next, he taps his mana to cast a Hyrax Tower Scout, and when it enters the battlefield, he untaps his Elked Commander, and with nothing left, he ships the turn to Adam. Adam untaps and then retaps for 1 mana to cast a Soul Ring. He then taps his mana to recast his commander Radha, and he then goes to combat and creates another Goblin token from the Legion Warboss. He then declares his attackers, and when the Legion Warboss attacks, he puts another +1/+1 counter on another 1/1 Goblin, and then he swings a total of 17 damage at Nate L. Nate declares no blockers, takes the damage, and Adam generates 4 green mana and 4 red mana from Radha's ability, and he then draws 9 cards from Orin Frostfang. In his second main phase, he plays a Mountain as his land for turn, and he follows this up by casting a Shamanic Revelation, drawing a total of 10 cards from this cast. He then casts Escape to the Wilds, exiling top 5 cards of his library, including a Kiki Jiki, a Collector Oof, an Orcish Lumberjack, a Bombat Courier, and a Mountain. He then plays a Forest due to the Escape to the Wilds cast, and with no mana left, he discards down to hand size and passes the turn to Nate L. Nate untaps, and when he draws, Psychic Corrosion triggers and he mills his opponents for 2 more cards. He then plays a Swamp as his land for turn, and then taps for 2 mana to cast a Compost. He then taps his mana to cast a Memory Plunder, targeting the Windfall in Jordan's graveyard. Now, if you don't know what's going on here, every time Bill mills a card, if it's a black card, Nate will draw a card, again triggering Psychic Corrosion, so Adam, in an attempt to stop this possible win, for 1 red mana casts a red Elemental Blast, successfully countering the Memory Plunder. Nate L, with nothing left, passes the turn to Bill. Bill untaps and then taps for 1 mana to cast a Wild Growth, targeting his Swamp. He then taps his Elvish Mystic for a mana and then sacrifices it to Ghave to put a +1/+1 counter on Jordan's Quarter Monitor, drawing a card off of Generous Patron. He then for 2 mana casts a Regrowth, targeting his recently discarded Cryptic Trilobite. He then casts this Cryptic Trilobite for 4 mana, so X equaling 2, so it comes into the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters. He follows this up by paying a mana to remove the counter from his Young Wolf, and he then removes a counter from Cryptic Trilobite to generate 2 colorless mana, and he uses 1 of this to sacrifice his Young Wolf to Gabe's ability to put another +1/+1 counter on Cryptic Trilobite. The Young Wolf comes back due to Undying, and he uses his other floating colorless to remove that counter and create another Saproling. With these pieces on the battlefield, he can continue removing a counter from Cryptic Trilobite for 2 mana, and he can use 1 of this to sacrifice Young Wolf to put another counter on Cryptic Trilobite, and he can use the other floating colorless to remove the Undying +1/+1 counter, and he can loop this combo infinitely to create as many Saproling tokens as he wants. He then can remove 1 counter from Cryptic Trilobite to generate 2 mana, and with both of that mana, he can sacrifice using Gabe's ability to put 2 more +1/+1 counters on Cryptic Trilobite, essentially getting infinite amount of Saprolings and an infinite amount of colorless mana. When this is established, he plays a Swamp as his land for turn, and he then casts the Death Side of Life Death, targeting the Corpse Knight in his graveyard. It resolves, it enters the battlefield, he loses 2 life, and when Life Death hits the graveyard, Nate draws a card off of the Compost, and when he draws a card, all of his opponents mill 2 cards. Off of this mill, another black card hits Bill's graveyard, so Nate draws again with Compost. His opponents mill 2. Unfortunately, this time there are no black cards milled from Bill's library, and so the stack is then clear, and Bill has a Corpse Knight on the battlefield. With this Corpse Knight on the battlefield, he can repeat his previously mentioned loop to get infinite amount of ETBs, each time draining his opponents for 1, eventually winning the game. I gotta be honest, this pod was insanely fun to watch. There was so much back and forth, and there were so many things that I just wasn't expecting that it was just a good time watching these games live. A few of these decks I've seen perform budgetless, and I've actually thought about building a Radha specifically because I think it has a lot of value and can run some nice Staxy cards and mass land destruction that other commanders can't break parity with as easily, so I'm glad I got to see it in action, and really the budget restrictions kept these decks relatively balanced. There was a lot of back and forth between who was going to win and who was the most threatening at the time, and I just found that really interesting to watch it live, and I think it really showed with this game. We had a few other games that I'd really like to show you, but honestly, we just don't have time. Maybe sometime down the road, if you guys like this pod, we can produce that video for you. There's at least one more really good game that, if you guys are interested, we can throw that out sometime in the future. One thing specifically I wanted to just mention was the Memory Plunder play that Nadal made. I thought would have been really cool if that won. Now, this isn't really a gameplay discussion or anything. I just think it would have been really cool to win off of a Windfall, Compost, and a Psychic Corrosion combo. I don't know, I've just never seen those cards used like that before, and I think the budget restrictions of this pod really let areas like this and cards like that shine, and I don't know, I just think it was a really cool pod, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. That being said, that is all we have for this video. Hopefully you guys did enjoy it. Again, if you want to vote for your favorite commander, there's a link to a poll in the description, but that all being said, I am Joseph, this is Casually Competitive MTG, and we will see you next time.